Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and PoE Forbidden Sanctum has been announced. 3.2 expansion coming in 1 week time on December 9, and it is supposed to be Path of Exile's version of a roguelike. Path of Exile, as always, tries to incorporate other aspects of pretty much every other game into an ARPG sense, and this time around it's a roguelike. I personally am a big fan of roguelikes. I've played, Hades, Binding of Isaac, Vampire Survivors, that sort of shit. And I've got plenty more I'd still like to play, haven't got around to. So this one for me looks pretty damn tasty. I do think it looks like a very potentially good league mechanic. Of course, it's going to need, probably testing from us and various tweaks and all that as usual, but it looks like a potential absolute banger. So the idea will be that you basically every single zone have a chance to enter a little room, do some fights, some mechanics, and then make some decisions. If you're unaware of what a roguelike is, it is essentially a small playthrough of a game that has various choices to make, usually between 2 or 3 choices, and it impacts your next room or your overall run as to how things are going to go, as well as impacting your overall rewards. So you're going to join a room, you're going to fight some dudes potentially, or you're going to make a choice and then fight some dudes, and then you'll eventually be led to various rewards upon doing the rooms, completing the boss fights or the encounters, etc. And it's up to you to then make various decisions as to, like, if you make things easier, harder, more rewarding, less rewarding, etc. So ideally, these games and these situations lead themselves to a short playthrough, and also no 2 runs are supposed to really be the same. They might feel similar, but yeah. So league mechanic looks pretty damn good. The 2 new skills that they showcase look damn nice. The new uniques that are coming, we don't know too much about yet, but the couple have been teased, look very solid. Some reworked uniques for Endgame in particular, some reworked Atlas stuff. Overall, there is a lot to sink your teeth into and get excited about, I think. A lot of people are pretty upset that there isn't a huge revamp on skills like buffs necessarily to underused skills, but the thing that is basically being missing is little tweaks here or there can change entire metas, and some of these changes that happened were not that small, and as such they can impact an entire meta at the end of the league once things start getting figured out. So the curse changes, I think, are actually pretty substantial. On top of that, the 2 new skills are melee and they look pretty cool, and then there's VAAL skills happening as well. 2 have already been shown, and on top of that there's another 6 that have yet to be shown, but we do know what they are, and those have potential to be very, very big as well. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a second as well. But basically, there was the whole live stream announcement where Chris went over the actual Challenge League. If you want more info about it, you can watch the live stream. But it's, as always, just so much better to wait till it basically launches and then play around with it, and everything makes much more sense when you're piloting the thing rather than being told about it. But it looks like it has the potential to be a very good mechanic. They tried to solve the issue of, like, the urgency of going through the area and losing, which isn't necessarily dying. So that is resolved in this case. It's sort of an extra resource you have that will be depleted as you get hit by things, whether they are monster based or environmental based, and once you don't have any resolve left, you get kicked out of the thing, basically failing the run. So you don't necessarily have to die to lose, meaning that it can be hardcore friendly, which whatever. But yeah, potentially good rewards, potentially a very fun mechanic. I think it should be something that is likely going to be one of my favorite league mechanics ever, but we'll have to wait and see. Don't like making any random predictions. A few new uniques. So this thing here, gain additional elemental damage reduction equal to half your chaos res, which could be a huge extra amount of elemental damage reduction, especially if you're CI, for example. But it's a pure defensive amulet, so not necessarily something I'd be looking into personally, but yes, definitely something that can be quite substantial. Part of what's going to happen with the League rewards in the end for the mechanic is you will have an extra slot to place kind of a piece of gear, a relic, which you can't roll, you can't do anything with, you just find, you get them throughout the League content, I believe, and they can be pretty damn substantial. And so it's just pure power creep for the sake of power creep, just strictly isolated to the League, so likely won't make it to the next League or to standard or some shit. Maybe, who knows. Anyway, this is this version's form of power creep. These relics do look like they're going to be pretty damn good, but you have to be able to find them yourself. You can't trade for them, and you can't roll them or anything. So it might be a bit RNG based. Chris has said that they've done their best to like not make them too weak, so no like shitty rolls here or there. And if you find one, it should specifically do good things for whatever it's doing good things for. So that's good news. And yeah, it's, I think, the first instance of account bound items we've really seen. So that's, I'm thinking if heist trinkets were the same as that, but I think you could sell them, right? Anyway, yeah. Account bound, so that's big. Might set precedents for the future of other things as well. We then have some end game improvements that they talk about, which isn't too massive. It's just some Atlas tree revamp. It is still substantial enough, so currently for your Atlas tree, when you spec into bosses, or when you want to do your end game, you do spec into some boss wheels, specifically. If you want to do one side of like Eater of Worlds, you have to spec into Eater of Worlds stuff. You want to do Searing Exarch, you got to go all the way over to the other side, spec Searing Exarch. They've tried to kind of curb a bit of that sort of mishmash and mean that a lot of the stuff that you get that are bonuses from boss and stuff just happen inherently, so that your Atlas tree is more tailored towards you specking for the maps that you're going to be doing. And getting the League content out of them. So you don't have to do too many big respecs too often, varying on content. You just kind of spec what you like, and then maybe if you don't like that anymore, you try something else, as opposed to specking for certain pieces of content, certain boss fights, and that sort of shit. They've also given some of these Atlas nodes a bit more of a pass over and buffed various things, changed various things. So potentially good stuff there. Very potentially good stuff. It was a bit of a nuisance having to spec into some boss things when you were just going for that boss like 1 or 2 kills or some shit. So then there's other stuff that already happened during some manifestos. Eldritch Altar rebalance. This seems like okay stuff in general. I personally don't love Eldritch Altars in the game, but I do still utilize them and stuff. They stop your gameplay loop a bit, and they can be a bit too risk versus reward heavy one way or the other. So I don't love them, but they did some things to make them a bit better / different / worse. Just basically a balance pass on them. Scarabs can also drop randomly in the world now, so rusted scarabs. As well as that, you can also combine 3 scarabs to upgrade a scarab. And one thing I'll mention about scarabs that is later in the patch notes is there is now going to be a big notable on the passive tree that lets you put scarabs into your map device, and they won't do anything except for give your map pack size. That's really cool. That's really good. I personally don't like to use scarabs very often. I don't like tinkering around with that mechanic or what they add typically too much. So just being able to like chuck scarabs in randomly, especially ones that no one wants, and just get pack size, sounds like it's going to be pretty damn juicy. We then have a couple of new Atlas memories, and this time around it's for Einhar and for Shrines, domination stuff. They seem to have tried to make these pretty damn special. So these 2 new ones that are coming are going to give Einhar new recipes, find new beasts and shit, and some pretty damn special recipes. that are coming our way from that. And then the shrines are going to have all kinds of different shrine stuff. So shrines to gods that we haven't seen before that do different things. So it sounds pretty damn fancy. We then have a big one coming, that's Fracturing Orb. So this is a new type of currency. It's being attached to Harbingers. So Harbingers, if you spec into them, have a chance to drop some Fracturing shards, and then you can make a Fracturing Orb. And this is going to replace the Harvest Fracture thing. So it's probably a much more reliable way of getting Fracturing of the specific mod you want to do, instead of having to do like Oshabi and farm all the harvest shit. You can farm Harbingers and then eventually get this thing and get some really big fractures happening. Or you can just sell it for a lot of money, because I'm sure people would love to buy those for the high end of crafting especially. So pretty big new item coming there, and making Harbinger slightly more worth running. The new skills, there are 2 new skills coming and then a bunch of VAAL skills. The new skills currently being showcased, here we are. Basically a tectonic molten strike, so tectonic slam / molten strike thing. I mean, they like to do this at this stage. It kind of makes a bit more sense in PoE now, in that some skills are very old, and instead of just buffing a skill, like, it's still going to be an old skill but better, they kind of just come up with a new skill that might seem a bit like older ones, but do more fancier things, be a bit more, next generation. That's kind of what that one looks like. And then this one I thought was one of the cooler looking new skills they've showcased or released in a long time. It's a spell attack hybrid. So you're supposed to cast a spell that uses your weapon, and summons a few statue clones of yourself that then do this sweep attack. It's going to be an interesting one to figure out how to properly utilize and build around, but looks very cool and just, yeah, makes me want to log in right the fuck now. We then have some VAAL melee skills. So instead of just doing something about melee, which is a really hard problem to solve, giving them damage reduction or some shit, or giving them more damage, it's not that simple. They've attached some VAAL melee skills. So in this case here, we've got VAAL Cleave, and this one is, let me just get that out of the way so you can still see what's happening. It will give you a buff that gives your cleave more area, and something else. And as well as that, it's kind of like a headhunter. So it'll then let you steal mob rare modifiers and stuff. And then the other one they've teased so far is VAAL Flicker Strike, which is the most anime looking shit you've seen in games like this. And basically you pop your VAAL Flicker Strike, it attacks 25 times. Once it's done those attacks, the attacks then kick in, and it will work on single target. So you will be able to pop VAAL Flicker Strike on a boss, attack him 25 times, stand with your back turned to him, say you're already dead or some shit, and then he might explode in a flurry of cuts. It's going to be pretty damn cool. It might just be a bit too much of a meme, not super practical, but who knows. It might be a strictly single target upgrade for many different builds, even if you're not a Flicker Strike build. So we'll have to wait and see, but pretty cool stuff. There are another 6 VAAL melee skills. I think Molten Strike and Blade Flurry are a couple, and those have potential to be massive and game changers. So just to quickly mention about, talk about that from before, Lightning Strike is currently one of the most meta ones, and it is getting a bit of a nerf right now, but I think that VAAL Lightning Strike is one of the main reasons that Lightning Strike is so meta compared to a lot of other skills out there. There's a lot of good strike skills, a lot of good melee skills. Most of them don't have VAAL versions, and VAAL Lightning Strike is a very big addition to your toolkit as a damage attack sort of melee attack dealer on that build. And a lot of VAAL skills entering the fray here might shake up the meta in that way. VAAL Lightning Strike also is getting a nerf, but I don't think it's enough to kill it anyway. We then have a few new unique items. So a flask that does similar to Petrified Blood, prevents some immediate damage and then makes you take some of that damage over time. Should be pretty powerful as an amethyst flask especially. Not too many of those that are useful. And then a jewel that has consecrated ground. It's basically kind of like an inquisitor, though I don't know what profane ground does yet, unless I'm supposed to, but either way I don't. Consecrated ground linger, so it is kind of like the inquisitor shit, and if you balance it perfectly, then you will have both. Looks pretty powerful, and they are trying to incorporate a bunch more powerful unique jewels into this expansion. We've then also got what I think is potentially the first viable use of spell Impale. Impale's not too strong at the moment. I don't know if that's going to change with this, but there are a few ways to make spells Impale currently in the game, and it's just not enough to make it properly worth doing. This, however, looks like it might bridge that gap, because 50 increased effect of Impale on spells, and then all of the spells Impale by default, and getting the Collar Steel, that might make it worthwhile doing once and for all. Though, like I said, I think Impale is a bit weak at the moment, so I'm not sure if it's going to really reshape any sort of a meta there. They've then said that they're going to make unique items, especially just a few sort of endgame ones, quite a bit more chase, so they've buffed them rather massively to the point where, you know, they're competitive with some rare versions of themselves, of those weapons, and they're a lot rarer, so they want to make them pretty damn usable, but pretty damn rare. We're talking like Headhunter style rare, so it might be a bit far away from most of us using like these types of things, but some of the changes do look pretty cool and make them more usable. So specifically, a lot of these, yeah, they're okay, like Starforge, Soul Taker, 450 DPS, 800 DPS, pretty good stuff with a few special mods, definitely worth using if you've got one. But then we looked at one of the new ones that they're changing, and that's Void Forge. So Void Forge loses its fizz damage, which is fine, but instead of 300 fizz as Ellie, it turns into 700 fizz as Ellie. To me, that's ridiculous. I'm a Void Forge enjoyer. I've made many Void Forge builds. It's cheap as fuck. Not many people use it. 700 fizz as Ellie, when you stack a bunch of flat fizz, I incorporated that into one of my previous builds on PoE. 57% more damage right now, outright, if I get that thing. That's crazy. So that's a pretty large buff, but yes, they might cost like 30 divines or some shit and be very rare. We'll have to wait and see how that goes, but that's some shit that's happening. Jewel and ailment changes, that was in a manifesto, so some jewels get like ailment mitigation in higher quantities. It's easier to cap out your various ailment things that you're very much worried about through jewels now. Pretty big jewel here, modifiers to ignite duration apply to all elemental ailments. So if you get 100% less ignite duration on you or some shit like that, you can then have that apply to all the other elemental ailments as well. That's a pretty big jewel if you go through that route. Then I have the Hex rework. So basically they're dropping Doom as a mechanic and making it a bit less confusing. But the big thing there is, this was also in a manifesto, the big thing here is that bosses no longer have curse protection or curse resistance in any way. So they have adjusted curses a little bit, you know, removed a few things here or there, but for the most part this is a large buff for curses against pinnacle and endgame bosses. And just a couple of things that come to mind for me is ignite builds who kind of struggle to reduce enemy resistances on the end game should be quite a bit more potent against bosses now. Likewise with Chaos, Despair now will have -30 to enemy boss Chaos resistance. Just those two by themselves, pretty damn big and might shake up some of the metas. Then there's this ring. Where is it? This one. Curse limit equal to your power charges. So just by default, putting this thing on gives you 3 max curses. Pretty crazy. We'll see how rare that thing is though, but a very good item either way. You can have even more if you scale your power charges, of course. And then big manifesto came in where Arch Nemesis is essentially getting replaced, and as you can see, it's pretty much the old rare system coming back, but with, you know, revamped mods. So some things do a bit more, some things a bit more like streamlined, a bit more obvious, but Arch Nemesis no longer is going to be the way it is. And I talked about that in a previous video. So that by itself as well is going to just allow a lot more builds to exist in early and late game, because Arch Nemesis was pretty punishing. It got fixed up to be less punishing, still fairly punishing, but with all of that going away, yeah, you're going to be able to play a lot more of your builds that you want to, just for the fucking sake of it. We then have Ruthless coming to PoE in 3.2. If you're into that, by all means go get them. If you're not, just pretend it doesn't exist, no big deal. That's pretty much all there is to that, and I talked about it in a previous video. I don't think I'm going to be a Ruthless gamer, especially when you look at all the stuff you're getting in Path of Exile with 3.2 and other future patches and content and all that. It all just looks more and fun and different and all that, and then Ruthless is just like a bare bones stripping away of some shit, and it's just more challenge, and there's not too many of us that play PoE for those reasons anymore. So if you're into that, by all means. If you're not, leave people alone that want to do it, and don't get too upset that it exists, is my best advice to you. Some quality of life improvements, nothing too major there, like right click your like divine vessels instead of going to sin, energy shield bar above your character. You can check in on these. Your flasks from bestiary, gonna be much more obvious what they do. That's a pretty good one. And then new supporter packs. These new supporter packs do some pretty damn cool shit. So I like the direction they've taken in MTX, instead of just like making another gear set or something. You're getting MTX that do some crazy shit, sometimes just some really silly shit. So it's a good direction to take. By all means, once again, if you're into this sort of stuff, you know, buy a supporter pack. If you're not, no harm done, pretend it doesn't exist. You can do stuff like Forge in town, you can link your gear in front of people in town. Some really cool wacky shit, I think, that is just kind of creative and incentivizes you to spend in a different way instead of gear sets, I think. So yeah, cool stuff. And that's the announcement. As far as other stuff is concerned, I did go over the full patch notes. If you really want to know more about that, I suggest checking out the stream. I didn't take too long doing it, like a couple hours. Stuff that maybe didn't really get too much in the announcement that I should probably go over will be... Let's see, Pious Path on Inquisitor got a slight nerf, so instead of giving you 50% increased effect to conk ground, they just took that away, and it still does its base mechanic, so it's still very strong, but it doesn't give you that bonus bit of regen anymore. Not a huge loss there. Melee strike skills, additional enemies, so Tribal Fury, the additional strike skill target thing, got moved to a mastery, which can be seen as better because you can get it earlier and in different spots on the tree, but it also can be seen as worse because you can't anoint it anymore, so a bit of up and down there. They did put Melee Splash on the tree though instead of it, I think, so you can anoint Melee Splash instead, but they did remove strike skills target additional enemies 30 further away mastery, which is a bit weird. That's a very good mastery, and I don't think you should be removing that, is all I'll say there, right? Spectre Helix and Lightning Conduit. Spectre Helix got kind of dumpstered. I think in the early game it's probably still okay to level with, but it went from 160 to 100. In the end game it went from 250 to 150, which means that for actual single target damage it's going to be pretty shit. It's not that good at single target now anyway, unless you're doing really meme negative prod speed stuff. So yeah, either way, that's kind of dumpstered in endgame, but I think it'll still be levelable with this sort of damage. And then Lightning Conduit took like a 30% nerf or something, which still means it's playable and good, but it was fairly out of line with everything else this entire league. So it's entirely fair to have it be toned down a bit. Lightning Strike then since it's so meta and all that, did get a nerf. It's not a huge nerf, I don't think, for everything to do with the skill. So instead of basically doing 7 additional proj at level 20, it now does 2 additional proj. So nothing about the damage of it really got nerfed, but essentially if you want to still have good clear, you're probably going to have to use a GMP, which does nerf your damage for clear, but then on single target you'd replace the GMP for your usual damage gem, and it's still going to be a very good damage source for single target. I don't know. I think this is going to be fine. And like I said, other VAAL skills and other VAAL versions of things should bring up some other things too. Other things that might be really worth mentioning, Tainted Orb of Fusing's buffed to, I think, basically like Scourge League values, which means it's really easy to get Corrupted 6 links again. I think they're pretty damn overpowered. A few little changes here or there. Little changes still. There's a few bug fixes that were actually rather interesting. So I think, for example, temp chains from your gloves, curse on hit, apparently was applying a huge penalty, 50% less effect on players. Was being applied to the monsters as well. So temp chains should feel more powerful. Vulnerabilities like damage, faster ailment thing on it wasn't working. It's removed now anyway, but it apparently wasn't working. And likewise, there was something else, poisons. So if we actually look at poison, that was a big one that got kind of shafted. Fixed a bug where modifiers that make ailments deal damage faster incorrectly lowered the duration of poisons twice, resulting in lowering total damage dealt over the lifetime of a poison debuff. So with that being fixed, like, poison's got a huge amount of extra damage that we didn't know we were missing, which is a bit silly. There are some bugs here that you're just like, oh fuck, I didn't know that was happening. So good things that they're being fixed. As far as what else I needed to mention, I guess the only other thing, yeah, like I said, curses. The big thing about the sort of power we're gaining from this league is overall curses against bosses. So let's say you had an LE weakness previously and it did like minus 40 LE resists. Against a boss, that's going to do like 13 LE res or some shit. And thus it's rarely even worth using curses against endgame bosses or caring about them. Whereas with these changes, you have like a minus 30 LE resist, LE weakness, and that just applies completely to that boss now. And that's pretty big, especially for some builds that struggle to gain things like LE penetration and all that. I think there is going to be more of a meta around getting at least 2 curses into your build, because it's almost always going to be worth doing. Whereas before, having a baseline hex is usually pretty good. Not hex, mark, usually pretty good. So you mark your target, very good. If you get another curse, okay, not too bad, especially for clear, but doesn't do much for bosses. Whereas now I think you will be focusing more on getting at least 2 curses into your build, and that's quite a lot of power for boss fights. I don't think I really want to mention anything else, just overall talking about the whole thing. And I'm pretty damn tired and ready to go to sleep. It's been a long day. I think that, yeah, 3.2 has potential to be very, very good. Especially, basically, it's going to depend on whether or not the league mechanic is super fun, and I see no reason at the moment to doubt it. But just because things didn't get buffed doesn't mean there isn't a meta shakeup, because even the smallest of changes to some mechanics can shift an entire meta or an entire way of building characters or skills, and I think curses are the big one here. Otherwise, yeah, VAAL melee skills, we'll have to wait and see what some of the other ones do, but they can be pretty damn potent if doing the right things and reshaping some various ways of building or various metas, maybe the melee meta. I'm optimistic is all I'm going to say. As always, though, you know me in Path of Exile, optimism is key, and I think the game's in a pretty good place right now, even without any changes. Just getting extra stuff is actually going to be good enough and should make for a banger of a league. And it's December launch, so everyone gets a bit of time off and much more time to sink into it. Yeah. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the announcement and this video, and I'll see you next time.